right, we're ready for chapters 39 and 40 of Exodus. This will wind up this trimester. You should have received questions for Leviticus, and that will be our next. We'll look at Leviticus and Numbers in our next trimester, and so that's where we're headed. So this is going to wind this up. This is where we are. This is our last look at our outline of the book of Exodus, and we are in the section on the tabernacle being completed. We've looked at the Exodus itself, the law, and then the tabernacle. And those are, I like what Baxter has done with his outline here. That's not all that's in each one of those sections, but the first major section, the first 18 chapters, does focus primarily on the Exodus, the coming out of Egypt. And then there is the law section, the revealing of the law, and then there's the focus on the tabernacle and all of the contents thereof. Let's one more time review chapters, at least a portion of those. Chapter 1 opens with, all right, they're suffering in Egypt. In chapter 2, God raises up a man and Moses, who have the birth of Moses. God raising up a leader that's going to take care, help with that problem. Chapter 3, all right, so it's called, reminds us of the Gospel of Mark. He gets quickly to his point in telling the story. In chapter 4, what was Moses' reaction? Yeah, made excuses. And then chapter 5, Pharaoh's reaction to the plea. Increased the suffering. And then there was the assurance to Moses and to Israel. And then we have the plagues. We have the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th. And then the announcement of the 10th. Then chapter 12 is the actual 10th plague. Chapter 13, firstborn, sanctified in the Feast of the Unleavened Bread. Chapter 14 is the actual Exodus, the crossing of the Red Sea. That's what the book is named after. Chapter 15, because of that, Song of Deliverance, the celebration. Chapter 16, manna from heaven, closely connected with that. Chapter 17, water from the rock. Who gave some advice? Jethro, chapter 18. So chapter 19 is a important point because what happens in 19? They finally get to Sinai. Chapter 20, that's the 10 Commandments. Then we have a large section here concerning various laws, and we'll move on over to chapter 25. Chapter 25, table to show bread and a lampstand. Then 26 starts the section on the tabernacle. And then we have the various items such as the altar in the court, the garments for the priest. We're going to flag chapter 28 multiple times tonight. Then there's the consecration of Aaron, etc. There's the altar of incense, etc. Then what happens in chapter 32? That's the golden calf. And then in chapter 33, they leave Sinai with God's presence. God renews the covenant. And what's chapter 35? Yeah, Sabbath and then the materials. Chapter 36, there's the offering for and the building of the tabernacle, the instructions thereof. Chapter 36 and 37 and 38 we group together, dealing with making the articles for the tabernacle. And so the tabernacle is yet to be assembled. All right, let's get underway with chapter 39 and 40. Give our outline on that in just a moment. But here's something I want you to flag. If you haven't already done that in previous studies, get a pen or a pencil. Pencil is preferable, I think, because 18 times, we're not going to do them all at once. We're going to do them as we work through. But I'll flag each time it's used. 18 times you'll find this expression or the equivalent thereof. And a statement will be made as the Lord had commanded Moses. Now, not that exact phrase every time, but it'll be in essence the same thing. And this is important. Now, here's some things we learned from that. This is the fulfillment of the Lord's instructions that began in chapter 26. Now, we already talked about that in our previous studies, that here was the instructions for the building of the various things. For example, the the ark of the covenant and the instructions thereof that we talked about last time. But here's the second thing that we learn, and that is that we must do just as the Lord commands, no more, no less. If we do more, it's not as the Lord commanded. If we do less, it's not as the Lord commanded. And so it gives emphasis. If we don't get any other lesson, God gave instructions, and then they did it just as the Lord commanded. Just as the Lord commanded. All right. Then I learned this lesson too, number 3. There's a difference in being told something and planning to do something and in actually doing it. Does that make sense? Just because we've been told something, that's not equivalent to us doing that. We misunderstand that sometimes in preaching. Maybe we need a dose of a lesson on some sin that is prevalent, and so we get a dose on that and we think, okay, that's over. No, all we did was give instructions. We got instructions. We're not doing it. That's just the instructions for that. And maybe, well, I'm going to make some changes in my life. Well, that's planning. That's not doing it. So there's a difference in being told, planning, and actually doing. This is the story of actually building the tabernacle. Make sense? All right. And then let's flag a verse here at chapter 40 and verse 33. The text ends there. That verse ends with, so Moses finished the work. So I'm learning a lesson here that we must finish the work that we started. Maybe it's living the Christian life. Maybe it's started raising your family in the right direction. Maybe it's started praying better. We've got to finish the work. Finish the work. It's not enough to get started. We've got to finish the work. Moses finally finished the work. So we're going to flag that. So I'm going to mention each one of those. We'll mention all 18 tonight. And hopefully you'll underline those and give emphasis to those as we go along. All right, what's chapter 39 about? All right, the making of the garments for the priest, for the high priest, and for the priest, and the work is finished. And then we'll see more about that as we go along in chapter 40. All right, so let's get chapter 39 here. And what we have in chapter 39 in verses 1 to 31, and I'll give these, I'm about to leave this slide. You'll see it again. But we're going to be flagging chapter 28. So you might put a marker over chapter 28. We're going to go over there because there'll be some instruction that we'll want to pay attention to, some details, maybe a purpose for something, what was to be done with something, that over here we only have the making of that. All right? So we're going to be flagging chapter 28 all throughout, and I'll give those as we go along. So we're going to have the ephod, and we're going to have the breastplate, then the robe, the coats, and then the headpiece. All right? Then we'll get to the finishing of the work itself. All right. These are 2 slides. We've seen each one has a little bit different picture that may help us a little bit concerning the garments for the priest. Before we get started with verse 2, where that begins, they took verse 1, the blue and the purple and the scarlet thread that they made the thread to start with, as we've already noted. And this was for the ministering, for the garments for the ministry of the holy place, and made the holy garments. Now here's our first of 18. Number 1 is as the Lord had commanded Moses. There's your first one. And to get ahead of ourselves, the 18th is found over in chapter 40 and verse 32. So if we get past that and you haven't marked all 18, you missed one somewhere. Or I missed one to tell you. So let's mark those. I think you'll find that helpful for future studies. Over and over, as the Lord commanded, as the Lord commanded, as the Lord commanded. All right, let's get underway about the ephod. Now, the ephod is this garment right here. If you can follow my red dot, it's this garment, this somewhat like a vest. We'll come back to the breastplate here, but this garment here, perhaps this is a better picture of that right here as per the description given here in our text. So let's talk about that. And then we'll flag chapter 20. So if you want to mark in the margin of your text where the parallel is found for the instructions, it's 28 verses 5 to 14. Chapter 28, 5 to 14. Now we're going to learn something here that's only mentioned in chapter 39. And at verse 3. But first of all, they made the ephod of gold and blue and purple and scarlet thread. and of fine linen thread. Now, what's interesting at verse 3, we haven't seen this before. If we didn't have 39, we wouldn't know this. What'd you learn? Yes, they made these golden threads. How did they make the golden threads? Took gold, hammered it out till it was extremely thin, and then they cut it in threads. I want to tell you, that'd be difficult in our day and time, wouldn't it? Now, that's amazing to me, how they made the threads. Not that they had some gold dye, but they take gold, hammer it till it's thin, and then cut thin enough and small enough that you consider that a thread. And then you're going to take that with the blue and the scarlet and the purple thread, and you're going to make fine linen. And with the fine linen, you're going to put this together into an artistic design. But that's quite fascinating to me, the amount of time that went into that. Now, we'll flag the time a little bit later. How long did it take to make all of this material? We'll get to that here in a minute. That'll be in chapter 40. All right? So they took this and they made all this into artistic designs. What else do we learn? 4, 5, 6, and 7. They made shoulder straps, so we have the straps that we have here for this ephod, and they coupled it together on its edges. And there was this band that's mentioned at verse 5. We already saw in chapter 28, that's this sash or this band that goes around, made of the same material. If you can see that right there where my red dot is, that's the sash. This described at verse 5. Now, ready for number 2 of our 18 is at the end of verse 5, as the Lord had commanded Moses. So just as he had commanded to make that sash and to make this ephod, they did it. Now, at verse 6, they set onyx stones in settings of gold and engraved our signets are engraved with the names of the children of Israel. In other words, they set 2 stones here on the corners. Perhaps this here gives a little better picture of that. These stones right here that I'm circling on the shoulder straps, those stones, they set stones there and engraved on them the names of the sons of the children of Israel. Now we get something about the significance of that in chapter 28. Let's go ahead and get verse 7. And he put them on the shoulders that they should be stones for a memorial for the sons of the children of Israel. Here you're ready for number 3 of 18. And that's at the end of verse 7, as the Lord had commanded Moses. All right, makes sense? So 3 times just in making this ephod, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. Now, let's just pause there just for a moment and make application of that phrase. Can it be said when your life is over that so-and-so, fill in your name there, did just as the Lord commanded? Maybe you take the command to worship just as the Lord commanded. Maybe to love your husband, love your wife, forgive, etc., just as the Lord commanded. Now let's go to Exodus 28, beginning at verse 5. We're not going to read all of this, but we're going to flag some of the things that may have not been discussed in our building or the making of that. At verse 10, where the instructions are given, 6 names to be on one stone and 6 on the other, according to their birth, and then various stones. We'll get to what some of these stones may or may not be when we get to the breastplate, so I'm going to leave that for the time being. Verse 14, this is mentioned later in Exodus 39, and that is, verse 14, they were to make what? There would be some gold chains up here, and we'll talk about the significance of those chains, braided like cords, fastened and braided at chains in the setting. That is where the stones were. All right. Now, we're going to say more about the significance of all of that a little bit later. Questions or comments so far? All right, let's go back to chapter 39 rather, and let's talk about the breastplate. We're at verses 8 to 21, and your parallel, if you want to make that in the margin of your text, 28, 15 to 38. Let's talk about this breastplate. Now, The breastplate on the ephod was made of what? All right. Gold and blue and scarlet thread and fine linen. In other words, very similar material out of which the ephod was made. And notice the size of that. Now, we flagged this earlier when we were in chapter 28. We'll do that again here. And that is, it was made by doubling it, and a span was its length, and a span was its width when doubled. How big is a span? It's a half a cubit, and a cubit is 18 inches. Half of 18 is 9, so it's a 9 by 9 square. So in other words, it was 9 by 18, then doubled, and when it's folded or doubled, it's 9 by 9. So it fits on the man's chest, as you see here. So that is making of this breastplate. Now what's interesting is, to me at least, whether these stones are equivalent to what the name of these names stand for in our day and time. Some scholars suggest we are not sure. In other words, let's just take one. Let's take, for example, an emerald at verse 10. We'll talk about what stones went where in a minute. Is that the same that we think of as an emerald? Some scholars say we're not sure. Maybe it is. I'm not sure it makes a big significant difference for us. These were precious stones, as we would have precious stones, whether it be emerald or sapphire or a diamond or whatever. Does that make sense? So these are precious stones. Now, how were they set? Verse 10. There were how many rows? 4 rows of 3 each, making 12. And then it tells us what's on the first row, without us dealing with every one of those. But there's a sardius and a topaz and an emerald in the first row. In the second, a turquoise and a sapphire and a diamond, and on down the line. And they're setting in settings of gold. What's on these stones? Verse 14. The names of the sons of the children of Israel, of the 12 tribes, and they made chains. Verse 15, for the breastplate at the ends, that's the top end of that. We'll come back to that in a second. And how was it attached? There were 2 gold rings. Go ahead. 2 gold chains attached to 2 gold rings on that end, the top end of that. And then what do we see beginning at verse 18 and 19? That would strap it to the ephod on the shoulder straps, made 2 rings of gold, put them on 2 ends of the breastplate, verse 19 says, which was on the inward side, in other words, under the underside of the ephod. And they made 2 other gold rings. This is talking about now on the bottom end. And how was it attached? Verse 21. Seen. Yeah. I don't know if you can tell, but these little cords right here, where if you follow my dot right here, by blue cord was attached so that the ephod would not come loose. Now we're ready for number 4 of our 18 at the end of 21. Here's your 4th one. And that was as the Lord had commanded Moses. All right, now let's go back to the breastplate. And in chapter 28. Let's go to chapter 28 and flag a couple of things there. At verse 16, we made a note there, perhaps you've got it in the margin of your text, that when it was doubled, it forms a pocket. And what would go in that pocket? That's where they would keep the Urim and the Thummim. That's not mentioned in chapters 39 and 40. Does that make sense? So that's where it's helpful to tag the verses together, chapters together, and so we get a little information there. Let's jump on down to verse 29. Here's something about what would be accomplished by having this breastplate with the names. So Moses shall bear the names of the sons of Israel on the breastplate over his heart when he goes into the holy place as a memorial before the Lord continually. So as he's ministering as a high priest, he's carrying, it's symbolic of him carrying the names of the children of Israel. He's taking Israel in with him as he goes and makes the sacrifice. That makes sense? And that serves as a memorial, as a reminder that he's always working on behalf of the children of Israel and making sacrifice for them. Does that make sense? All right. That's where these, again, tagging verses together will be a little bit helpful. All right. Now let's see let's back up and see what's next. Let's talk about the robe beginning at verse 22 through verse 26. And this is a robe made of what color? That's this robe here. It's the blue robe. All right? And that you see here, and same kind of robe right here. This is this robe that's under the ephod, but it's over another garment that we'll talk about here in a second. All right, let's see what we learn here in verses 22 to 26. That they made a robe made of woven work of blue, and there was an opening in the middle. What's that for? Basically where his head goes through. And what's around that hole? It was a woven binding so that it wouldn't tear. Now what's at the bottom of this robe? They're pomegranates of blue and purple and scarlet and fine linen thread. And then verse 25, and they made bells of gold and to go between them, and the bells and the pomegranates around the hem of the garment. Now we're ready for number 5 of 18 at the end of 26, as the Lord had commanded Moses. So this is this blue garment right here, and here's the pomegranate and the bells. You don't actually see much of the bells. You get up a little closer, but anyway, this is it right here. All right, let's go over to chapter 28 and look at 31 to 34. See if we learn anything there about the instructions there that we haven't seen elsewhere, and we do. So again, you make this robe, and there's an opening for his head in the middle. That wasn't mentioned there. It says there was an opening, but this text says it was for his head. That's why I mentioned that earlier. We had already learned that. But drop down to verse 25. And it shall be that when he ministers, and its sound will be heard. Remember the bells? We're not told when they made it what the bells were for. What were the bells for? Verse 35. Yes. He can be heard when he goes into the holy place before the Lord and when he comes out, that he may not die. If you didn't flag there, verse 43, do that, and that'll be helpful for future studies. In other words, it tells he's going about his business and doing his work. He's not over here serving, and I'm wondering if the high priest is doing his job. I wonder if he's going in as he should. We know he's going in because he's making noise as he goes in and as he comes out. Does that make sense? So he's going about his task, and without it, he's separated from the people, meaning he's not doing the work. Without that, we don't know what's going on. We're with him. We know what he's doing. We hear him going, and we hear him coming. So again, the value of tagging those verses together. Questions? Comments? All right, let's go to the coats that we have beginning at verse 27. He made tunics, artistically woven of fine linen for Aaron and for his sons. And this kind of groups some things together. So this is this lighter colored garment that you see here, perhaps better here, that's artistically woven, that would be called a tunic. They were made for Aaron and also for his sons. And then he adds to that, what else are they making? Verse 28. Yeah. And in verse 29, and a sash of fine linen, purple and scarlet thread. Here we are, number 6, as the Lord had commanded Moses. It's interesting that phrase is just thrown in sometime. If you hadn't already read this kind of surprises you at times that it just happened to be thrown in before he gets through with the description of what all is being done, as the Lord had commanded Moses. Now, let's get the parallel account to that. And if I can get my pages apart here, let's go to 28 verses 39 and 40, where we have, make sure I've got my right verses there. Yeah, 39 to 40 concerning these coats. Chapter 28, that there's the skillfully woven tunic, and I was looking to see if I had flagged something there that I needed to. And then also the tunics and the sashes and the hats. There's nothing that I see there that I meant to come back and flag. All right, now let's get the headdress over here in chapter 39. What do we see in verses 30 to 31? You see the headdress here. There would be a turban. And what's on this turban that we've already discussed back in verse 29 or 28? All right, yeah, it's an inscription or given the engraving of a signet that said what? Holiness to the Lord. And how was it attached? By a blue cord. Perhaps better seen here. So that's this signet that says across the forehead, holiness to the Lord or holy to the Lord. And they tied it with a blue cord and fastened it above on the turban. Here we are, number 7 at verse 31, as the Lord had commanded Moses. Making some sense? Now let's talk about this headdress over here in chapter 28. Chapter 28, verse 38. So it was that on Aaron's forehead, and Aaron shall bear the iniquity of the holy things which the children of Israel hallowed, and all their holy gifts shall always be on his forehead, that they may be accepted before God. So what did we learn when we were over there in chapter 28? That he's dealing with the sins of the people before a holy God. That as a high priest, he's dealing and bringing sacrifice for sins, but this holiness to the Lord across his forehead reminds himself and the people he serves that I'm dealing with the sins of these people before a holy God. Holiness to the Lord. Does that make sense? And so it was a constant reminder of that, lest someone forget that he, as a high priest, was dealing with our sins. Our high priest does the same thing. All right, now that's the work completed in the sense that that's the last thing to be discussed, except to say, now in chapter 39, beginning of verse 32, the work was finished. Let's see what that's all about. So get ready to flag number 8 at the end of verse 32. According to all the Lord had commanded Moses, so they did. That reminds me of Genesis 6:22 in building the ark. So he did. So he did. I like that phrase. As the Lord commanded, so he did. Could that be said of you? As the Lord commanded you, so you did. Could that be said of me? Interesting phrase. Thus all the work was finished. And so what that simply means, because we haven't assembled the ark yet, the tabernacle is the making of the Ark of the Covenant, making of the lampstand, making of the laver, making of the various articles has been done, making of the garments has been done, but the priests aren't suited up yet, nor has the tabernacle been erected. But all this work has been completed. Everything's been made. All the thread has been made, then the cloth has been made, it's been woven together, and now all of the coverings have been made, etc., etc. All right. So they brought it to Moses. And so now we'll pick up some speed here. Verse 33 through 41 is basically a list. And so whether it be the furnishings or the clasp or the boards or the bars or the pillars or the coverings of ram skin or badger skin or the ark or the table or the lampstand and on down the line, the hangings of the court and the sockets, etc. So here's all the details, the pegs even. They brought them all to Moses. Now verse 42, we're ready for number 9. According to all that the Lord had commanded Moses, so the children of Israel did all the work. What's interesting to me here is all of the children of Israel are included and not just the craftsmen. We've been giving attention to the artisans, skilled workers, that would weave over here, and those that would hammer out and make gold, and those would make things of acacia wood, etc. But all the children of Israel are involved somehow. How could they be involved? Well, we don't know all that they did, but we know some things. Yeah. They brought the materials. I'm going to let you finish. But let's go back. They brought the materials to start with, didn't they? And so they can't make anything of gold without the gold. So what good does it do have an artisan to make things out of gold if you don't have gold? Go ahead.
Well, they also supported the craftsmen while they were.
Okay. Absolutely. So they support and as is done in other kinds of works. So they're involved. That's the point I want you to see. Now then, verse 43 to finish the chapter, then Moses looked over all the work, which suggests to me he's looking in detail. And indeed they had done, number 10 of our 18, as the Lord had commanded, just so they had done it. And Moses blessed them. So how did he know if it was right or not? That question was raised some years ago in a Bible class. How did he know if it was right? Say again? Well, he blessed them. That's true. I'm looking, how would he know, for example, that the ark, he looks at the ark, you come bringing me the ark, okay, it's right. How does he know? Yeah, simple answer. Because God had told him how wide, how tall, how big is to have two cherubim, how they were looking at. He just looks at the instructions that God gave him. Yep, it fits the instructions. Well, what about the laver? Well, it wasn't. We weren't given instructions of the size, and so does it fit the description? God said, make a laver that hold water. Yeah, it does. All right, you're good. All right. What about the how many posts they were to have for around the courtyard? Well, there'd be 20 on each side. So you got 40, and then you got 10, and you got 5. Okay, you got enough. Got exactly what I told you. He just follows instructions. That's all it is. That's what I'm after. All right. Let's go to chapter 40. What's it about? Tabernacle is erected in the cloud. So let's see if we can get through this. We're going to be able to work through sections here. By that, just as we did going through all this list in chapter 39, we can do that here. We do want to do a little time work here. So what we have in chapter 40, 1 to 33, is the tabernacle is erected. So notice at verse 2, on the first day of the first month, you shall set up the tabernacle of tent of meeting. Now let's jump over to verse 17. They are tied together. Then it came to pass on the first month of the second year, on the first day of the month, that the tabernacle was raised up. Okay? So let's do a little timetable. Classen, in his chronology, and I follow Classen. Why do I follow Classen? Could somebody be better than that? But if I start a chronology, I don't want to shift chronologies in the middle of the Bible. Does that make sense? Because somebody else may be a few years different. So I'm not interested in being real critical in the years. I want to get a general idea of time. So he puts this at 1461 BC. So when the tabernacle is finished, we have been 431 years, according to Classen, since the call of Abraham. 858 years since the flood. So that gives you a little time frame. All right, let's do a little more time work. They've been out of captivity for approximately a year. So since chapter 14, we've covered a year. And we're basing that on chapter 19 in verse 1. They arrived at Sinai in the third month. So there's 3 months there. Moses spent 2 stints of 40 days each. That makes 80 days. That's well over 2 months on the Mount Sinai in chapter 24 and chapter 34. So the tabernacle approximately now, and see, you say, how do you know we're a year in? Because of verse 17. Approximately 11 months and so many days. So anyway, we're shy of a year. So we're just, for round numbers, we're saying a year. So the making of the tabernacle from the time of receiving instructions was approximately 6 months. Now, how'd they do that in 6 months? They didn't have state and county regulations, is number one, or inspectors. But the number of people working. And But that's including, that's fascinating, 6 months when you think of, they bring the gold and they got to make things out of gold. They bring things to make the thread out of and they make the thread. They have to hammer out the gold and make the golden thread. That takes a lot of work. And so in 6 months they got this all finished. All right, now notice at verse 3, we're going to quickly run through verse 3 through verse 8. Because God's giving him instructions here, basically how I want you to set it up. I want you to put the ark in once you get the tabernacle made. Erected, and then you're going to put the veil in, then bring the table in, then the lampstand, and then the altar of incense, and then you're going to put the screen on the front, then you're going to put the altar out front and the laver, and you're going to make the courtyard around. That's what you're going to do. Well, that's what he does. Now, let's come down here to verse 9, or verse 8 starting. Then they're going to take the anointing oil, and there's the dedication or the anointing of the tabernacle, all the utensils, and verse 9 we'll talk about it shall be holy. And verse 10 talks about the altar shall be most holy. I'm not sure there's a distinction in holy and most holy. You may think so. I'm basing that on chapter 30 and verse 29 that all things were made holy. So I'm not sure there's a significant difference in holy and most holy, but you do with it what you wish. Then there's going to be the anointing of Aaron. At the door of the tabernacle, there's the holy water for them to wash, so they'll be ministering as priest. And you're going to anoint his sons like you do him. So here is the ceremonial things going through of getting things rolling for the priesthood. Now we're ready for number 11, verse 16. Thus Moses did according to all that had been commanded him, so he did. Number 11 of 18. All right, let's get to verse 17. Verse 17, what do you learn? When we learn two things. Yeah, it's on the first day of the month. Yeah, on the first day of the month of the second year, on that first day, the tabernacle was raised up. So it was possible to raise up the tabernacle. Now, the items had already been made. All the boards and the bars and the coverings have all been made. It's just a matter of erecting it. And that could be done easily in a day. You say, how do you know? Because this text is telling me they did it on that day. So it wasn't like, well, in about another week and a half, we're going to get this thing all erected. Everything's made. It's just assembling it. Make sense? So it's done in a day. So he raised up the tabernacle, and he fastened all the boards and the sockets and the pillars, etc., and he spread out the tent and the coverings over it. Now, number 12, verse 19, as the Lord had commanded Moses. Now, verse 20, we don't have time to develop this thoroughly, but there's some question as to the contents of the Ark of the Covenant. And so I'll just mention some verses where you might want to ponder that. That he took the testimony and he put it into the ark. Nothing is mentioned about anything else being put there. Hebrews 9 in verse 4, if you want to turn there, that may help you a little bit. And then I'll give you some Old Testament references quickly. And tell you what the question is. If I can find my Hebrews passage. Hebrews 9 and in verse 4 talks about that, I'm starting at verse 3, behind the second veil, the part of the tabernacle which is called the holiest of all, which had the golden censer and the ark of the covenant overlaid on all sides with gold, in which were the golden pot which had manna, Aaron's rod that budded, and the tablets of the covenant. So we talked about that last time, that there was the pot of manna, whether that's there at this point, we're not told. And then Aaron's rod that budded, whether it's there, we're not told. That's not mentioned here. Now, the Aaron's rod that was budded, mentioned in Numbers 17:10, and the pot of manna in chapter Exodus 16 and verse 13. But by the time we get to 1 Kings 8, nothing is there but the tablets of stone. And why? Some argue that they never were put inside. They were sitting beside, close by. And I hadn't thought much about that. I'll leave you to study that out because we don't have time now. But some have suggested that Hebrews 9 doesn't demand they were inside, that it only suggests they were in the most holy place. I want to think it's saying they were inside, but they're not by the 1 Kings. I'll leave that for you to work out. Now, verse 21, here we are again, number 13. He hung the curtains, etc., and petitioned off the ark just as the Lord had commanded. Verse 23, number 14, as the Lord had commanded Moses, he set the bread up, the table of bread, and then the lampstand. And then verse 25, he lit the lamps. Now, Aaron's going to do that later, but I take it that setting the things up, Moses did that on the first run. And as the Lord, number 15, as the Lord commanded Moses. All right. Now, let's work our way on, try to get through verse 33, and then I want to add Leviticus 10 perhaps to this, or two passages to this. At verse 27, as the Lord commanded Moses, that's number 16. He put the altar of burnt offerings before the door. Verse 17, as the Lord commanded Moses, that's number 17. And then number 18 is as the Lord commanded Moses, found in verse 32. Now, if you're missing one of those, you should have 18 of those flagged. If you're missing one, tell me which one, and I'll tell you where that's found. Now, the tradition said, well, let's go ahead and get verse 33. That he raised up the court. He built the court around the tabernacle and hung the screen. That's the gate to the outer court that we have right here. This gate right here. I'll get it here in a second. Right there. That curtain or gate. Set that all up. Set the screen up. So Moses finished the work. Now, what's interesting is by the time that statement is made, he's just finished the tabernacle and got it all set up. Less than 2 years before he was out as a shepherd boy. Now you think about that. He was out as a shepherd, and God calls him to be a leader, and he's reluctant about that, and now he's the one erecting the tabernacle and got it all done, and he's finished the work. 2 years. And God knew he could do it. And now he's fulfilling exactly what God had told him in chapter 3, particularly verse 12. All right. Tradition says Psalm 90 fits here, for what that's worth to us. Psalm 90, you might flag verse, we're about done. I want to make some comment on the pillars of fire, but some think Psalm 90 fits here. It's a psalm of Moses. Verse 17 may give us the clue. Some also think that Nadab and Abihu's disaster where they offered strange fire was during this initial ceremony of inaugurating the priest. And we'll get to that a little bit later. Now let's talk about the pillar of cloud that is talked about here in verse 34 to 38. You might flag chapter 13 in verse 21 and 22. They are not called a pillar here. They are in chapter 13. It says God led them with the cloud and with the fire. But other references talk about a pillar. It's the same word for column. And many of the drawings that you see, I think probably give an accurate picture. You think that looks like a tornado, but it's depicting more of a pillar or a column of smoke. And then at night there would be a pillar or a column of fire. Does that make sense? Rather than a widespread, like a forest fire that's just spread out all over the camp. That God seems to be leading them with this pillar or column of fire and column of smoke. So here's what I'm learning from that in this section, 34 to 38, is that God never left them to wonder when and where they should go and what they should do. When the cloud moved, they moved. When it didn't move, they didn't move. There's a lesson in that. When God moves, we need to move with him. When God doesn't move, we don't need to move. Does that make sense? When God didn't move, I don't need to move. I'm going to stick with God. And when God starts moving, I want to go with him. And that's probably a good note to end on. That's the book of Exodus.